The numbers on the glowing screen didn't make sense. Wyatt rubbed his eyes, the grit of a 12-hour night shift at the warehouse scratching at his corneas, and stared at the joint savings account balance again. 3 years of overtime. 3 years of skipped lunches, calloused hands, and aching joints, all meticulously saved in a fund labeled Our Home. Yesterday, it had been $32,000. Today, it was barely $400. A cold, metallic dread pooled in his stomach as his eyes traced the transaction history. Steady, calculated withdrawals over the last 6 months, all funneled to an external account he didn't recognize. In the bedroom, the soft, rhythmic breathing of his wife, Savannah, drifted through the thin walls of their cramped apartment. She was sleeping peacefully, while the foundation of their entire future had been quietly, systematically dismantled. If stories of hidden betrayals, silent endurance, and the chilling art of a perfectly executed revenge speak to your soul, stay with me. The hum of the refrigerator in the cramped kitchen of apartment 4B was the only sound in the world. Wyatt James sat at the scarred Formica table, his heavy work boots still laced tight, the smell of cardboard, diesel, and industrial dust clinging to his denim jacket. It was 6:15 a.m. Outside, the Chicago suburbs were just beginning to shake off the night, the sky a bruised purple over the silhouette of the Riverside apartment complex. Wyatt stared at the glowing screen of his 5-year-old laptop. His eyes, rimmed with the red exhaustion of a 12-hour shift driving a forklift at Carter Industries, refused to blink. He pressed the refresh button on the banking portal. Once, twice. The pixelated numbers remained stubbornly, cruelly the same. Available balance, $412. 50. A slow, creeping numbness started in his fingertips and worked its way up his forearms. Just 3 days ago, he had checked this exact page. The balance had been $32,480. It was a number etched into the very marrow of his bones. That number was supposed to be their escape velocity, the down payment on a small, 2-bedroom house with a patch of grass in the back. It was the physical manifestation of 3 years of missed holidays, double shifts, and bone-deep aches that he swallowed down with cheap black coffee. He clicked on the transaction history. His hand trembled slightly, the mouse cursor hovering over a descending list of digital hemorrhage. Transfer, $5,000. Transfer, $8,500. Transfer, $12,000. Withdrawal, $6,500. All executed within the last 48 hours. All authorized by the secondary account holder. Savannah. Wyatt slowly closed the laptop, the soft click echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. He stood up, his knees popping in the silent kitchen, and walked down the short, narrow hallway toward their bedroom. The door was ajar. Inside, the room was bathed in the pale, gray light of dawn. Savannah was curled on her side, the duvet pulled up to her chin. Her dark hair was fanned out across the pillow, her breathing deep and rhythmic. She looked incredibly peaceful, innocent. Wyatt stood in the doorway, a ghost in his own home. He felt a sudden, violent urge to reach out, to shake her awake, to scream until his throat bled. He wanted to demand where his sweat had gone, where his backaches and his lost weekends were hidden. He wanted to tear the room apart until the money materialized from the walls. But his feet remained rooted to the cheap carpet. His jaw clenched so hard his teeth ground together. If their savings had been stolen by a hacker, the bank would have flagged it. If it was an emergency, she would have called him at the warehouse. But this was systematic. This was intentional. She had drained their life, dollar by agonizing dollar, while he was loading pallets of dog food and electronics in a freezing warehouse to build her a home. He backed away from the door, his heart hammering a dark, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He didn't know where the money went. He didn't know who she was giving it to. But looking at the woman sleeping in their bed, Wyatt realized with a chilling clarity that he was looking at a stranger. He didn't wake her. Screaming would only give her the upper hand. Screaming would give her a chance to lie, to cry, to weave a story out of his confusion. Wyatt walked back to the kitchen, picked up his thermal coffee thermos, and sat back down in the dark. The sun began to breach the horizon, casting a long, sharp shadow across the empty bank statement on his screen. The betrayal had already happened. Now, it was time to find out why. And more importantly, how he was going to make her pay. The hinges of the bedroom door whined, a familiar sound that usually signaled the beginning of Wyatt's brief domestic sanctuary before sleep claimed him. Today, it sounded like the screech of a rusty cage opening. Savannah padded into the kitchen. She was wearing one of his oversized, faded Carter Industries t-shirts, the hem grazing her bare thighs. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes, offering him a groggy, affectionate smile that made the coffee in his stomach churn. "Morning, baby," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. She walked behind his chair, wrapping her arms around his neck and pressing a kiss to his temple. Her lips felt cold against his skin. Wyatt's hands gripped the ceramic mug so tightly his knuckles turned a bloodless white. He forced his muscles to relax, pushing a slight, tired hum of acknowledgement from his throat. "Long night?" she asked, moving away to open the refrigerator. "The usual," Wyatt said. His voice sounded hollow, a crude imitation of his normal self. "Inventory on the 3rd floor. Dust everywhere." "You work too hard," she sighed, pulling out a carton of eggs and a package of bacon. "But it'll be worth it. We'll get out of this place soon." The audacity of the statement struck him like a physical blow. He watched her back as she stood at the stove. He continued to eat the tasteless food, methodically clearing his plate while she texted someone, a faint, secret smile playing on her lips. At exactly 12:15, a sleek, black, late-model sedan pulled into the loading zone in front of the diner. It was a leased luxury car, the kind that screamed of high-interest financing and an inflated ego. A man stepped out. He was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit that looked expensive from a distance but cheap up close. The fabric too shiny, the cut slightly aggressive. This was Tyler Black, the regional beverage vendor Savannah had casually mentioned a few times over dinner, always describing him as a harmless, talkative annoyance. Wyatt slouched lower in his seat, the stale air of the truck suddenly feeling suffocating. Tyler didn't go through the front door. He walked around to the side entrance, moving with the arrogant swagger of a man who owned the place. Wyatt adjusted his rearview mirror to catch the reflection of the diner's side window, his breath shallow and tight. A minute later, Savannah disappeared from the main floor. Through a narrow gap in the blinds of the employee breakroom window, Wyatt saw them. There was no hesitation, no professional distance. Tyler backed Savannah against the edge of a stainless steel prep table. His hands didn't just touch her. They claimed her, resting heavily on her hips, pulling her close. Savannah's face, usually so guarded and weary when dealing with their finances, tilted upward. She was laughing. It was a silent, breathless laugh that Wyatt hadn't seen since their first year of marriage. She reached up, her fingers threading into the lapels of Tyler's flashy suit, pulling him down for a kiss that was neither hurried nor secret. It was the kiss of a woman completely consumed. Wyatt's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard the worn leather groaned. His heart hammered a violent, sickening rhythm against his ribs. The metallic taste of adrenaline flooded his mouth. He looked at Tyler's suit. He looked at the leased sedan gleaming in the afternoon sun. Then, he thought of the $32,000 missing from his bank account. The agonizing math finally clicked into place. The money wasn't just gone, it had been transformed. His overtime pay, his skipped lunches, his aching back, all of it had been funneled into financing the illusion of luxury for the man who was currently pressing his wife against a table. Savannah wasn't just having an affair. She was a sponsor. A profound, terrifying stillness washed over Wyatt. The urge to storm the diner, to drag Tyler out by his slicked back hair and shatter the glass windows, evaporated. It was replaced by something much colder, much darker. Anger was a loud, messy emotion that made mistakes. What Wyatt felt now was absolute, freezing clarity. He didn't look away as they broke apart. He watched Tyler casually fix his tie, hand Savannah a clipboard of invoices as an alibi, and step back out into the alley. Wyatt watched the entire performance, burning every detail into his memory. He started the truck's engine, the low rumble vibrating through the floorboards, and pulled quietly out of the alley. The execution had just begun. Wyatt returned to the suffocating quiet of apartment 4B. The lingering scent of burnt toast and Savannah's vanilla perfume hung in the air, a domestic ghost that now felt like an insult. He bypassed the kitchen and went straight to the hall closet, reaching up to pull down a dusty cardboard box. Inside rested her old tablet, a sluggish device she had abandoned a year ago when she upgraded to a newer model. An upgrade he now realized had been funded by his overtime pay. He plugged the device into the wall. The battery icon flashed a weak, hollow red, slowly crawling to life. Wyatt sat on the edge of their unmade bed, the cheap mattress groaning under his weight, and waited. When the screen finally illuminated, he bypassed the lock screen with a sequence of numbers he had known for years, the date of their wedding anniversary. The bitter irony of the code tasted like old pennies in his mouth. The tablet was still synced to her primary cloud and email accounts. She had never bothered to log out, confident in her husband's blind, exhausting trust. Wyatt tapped the mail icon. His thumb hovered over the search bar. He didn't search for Tyler's name right away. He searched for the math. He typed in $5,000 first, the exact amount of the earliest major withdrawal. The screen populated with results almost instantly. It wasn't just automated bank notifications. There were receipts. Wyatt clicked the top email, his eyes scanning the digital invoice. It was from an upscale men's clothing boutique downtown. 3 tailored suits, shirts, and silk ties. The total matched the first missing chunk of their savings perfectly. His jaw clenched. He typed in another amount. This time, the search yielded a confirmation email from a luxury car dealership. It was a massive down payment on a lease for a high-end sedan. The very same black car he had seen gleaming in the alleyway next to the Sunrise Cafe just an hour ago. Savannah hadn't just bought the vendor a suit. She was financing his entire counterfeit existence. Wyatt's breathing grew shallow, methodical, as he scrolled further back. The digital breadcrumbs formed a paved highway of betrayal. There were booking confirmations for weekend suites at the Seaside Inn. Weekends when Savannah had claimed she was picking up double shifts to help build their house fund. There were direct digital transfer receipts to an account under the name T. Black, labeled with sickeningly domestic memos, for the apartment, for the insurance, just because. Every transaction was a physical blow, a translation of his physical pain into another man's pleasure. $500 was a week of driving the forklift with a strained rotator cuff. $2,000 was the holiday bonus he hadn't spent a dime of on himself. $32,000 was the sum total of his exhaustion, carefully wrapped up and handed over to a man who wore cheap cologne and leased a life he couldn't afford. He didn't shed a tear. The capacity for sorrow had been scorched out of him somewhere between watching them in the diner and sitting in this bedroom. Instead, a terrifying, absolute calm settled over his bones. He was no longer a grieving husband. He was an auditor examining a fraudulent ledger. Wyatt spent the next 2 hours taking meticulous screenshots of every receipt, every transfer, and every incriminating exchange. He created a new, secure email address under a fake name and forwarded the entire cache of evidence to himself. He then painstakingly cleared the tablet's recent search history, wiped his fingerprints from the screen with his shirt sleeve, powered it down, and placed it exactly where he had found it in the dusty box. When he stood up, his joints popped, but the heavy fatigue of the night shift had vanished. It was replaced by the cold, sharp energy of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to destroy. Wyatt did not go to sleep before his next shift. Instead, he drove 3 towns over to a sterile, brightly lit branch of a national bank where neither he nor Savannah had ever done business. Sitting across from a personal banker whose suit was far better tailored than Tyler Black's, Wyatt felt the warehouse grease under his fingernails and the heavy exhaustion pulling at his shoulders. He opened a single, individual checking account. He funded it with 2 crumpled $100 bills, his emergency cash stash from the glove compartment of his Ford. While the banker printed the welcome documents, Wyatt used his phone to access the Carter Industries employee portal. With a few deliberate taps, he erased the routing number of the joint savings account he shared with his wife. He replaced it with the new digits. From this moment on, every hour of overtime, every holiday shift, every drop of sweat he poured onto the concrete floor of the loading dock would belong solely to him. He was quietly severing the financial artery that kept Tyler's leased lifestyle afloat. The drive back to the Riverside apartments felt fundamentally different. The blinding, chaotic rage of the morning had solidified into a dense, protective armor. He parked a block away from the building, ensuring Savannah hadn't returned early from her shift at the diner, and took the stairs to the fourth floor to avoid the creaking, unpredictable elevator. Inside, the apartment was still suffocatingly quiet. Wyatt moved with the precision of a burglar in his own home. He bypassed the cheap electronics and the synthetic leather furniture they had bought together early in their marriage. Those things meant nothing anymore. He went straight to the back of their bedroom closet, pushing aside her row of colorful summer dresses and the new designer coats he now knew he had unwittingly purchased for her. Hidden beneath a stack of heavy winter blankets was a battered metal lockbox. Wyatt opened it with a small brass key from his ring. Inside lay the only things of true value he possessed: his grandfather's silver pocket watch, a pristine collection of vintage silver dollars, and his late mother's modest gold wedding band. Savannah knew the box existed, but she had always dismissed its contents as sentimental junk. Wyatt knew better. He carefully transferred the heirlooms into his heavy canvas work duffel. To maintain the physical illusion of normalcy, he replaced the weight of the valuables with a handful of heavy steel washers from his toolbox, locking the box and burying it back under the blankets. Next, he moved to the living room. His prized set of professional-grade mechanic tools, a gift to himself before he ever met his wife, sat neatly in a red steel chest in the corner. He couldn't take the whole chest without raising immediate suspicion, but he meticulously extracted the most expensive ratchets and specialized wrenches, rolling them tightly in blue shop towels and shoving them to the bottom of his duffel bag. He would store everything in his secure locker at the warehouse. Wyatt zipped the heavy canvas bag shut just as he heard the faint, distant whine of the complex's front security gate opening. He walked to the window and peered through the dusty aluminum blinds. Savannah was walking up the concrete pathway, her diner uniform exchanged for a flattering, dark blue dress he didn't recognize. She was staring intently at her phone screen, her thumbs typing rapidly, a soft, secret smile playing on her lips. He stepped back into the shadows of the living room, hoisting the heavy bag onto his shoulder. He had successfully removed his history and his future from the apartment. All that was left was the hollow shell of a marriage, waiting to be crushed. The physical exhaustion of the warehouse was nothing compared to the suffocating weight of the performance. It had been 4 days since Wyatt discovered the hollowed-out savings account. 4 days of sleeping next to a stranger, breathing the stagnant air of apartment 4B, and smiling at a ghost. Tonight, Savannah was making boxed macaroni and hot dogs. A budget meal, she called it, setting the steaming, fluorescent orange bowl between them on the scratched formica table. She sat down, letting out a heavy, theatrical sigh that seemed to drain the oxygen from the small room. "Groceries are getting ridiculous," Savannah muttered, pushing her food around with her fork. "I swear, my tips at the Sunrise barely cover the electric bill anymore. We're going to have to tighten our belts this month, Wyatt." Wyatt kept his eyes fixed on his plate. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the statement felt like a physical block of ice pressing against his windpipe. He chewed the bland, salty food, forcing his throat to swallow when every muscle in his jaw screamed to spit it out. "Tighten our belts." The phrase echoed in his skull. He thought of the 3 tailored suits hanging in Tyler Black's closet. He thought of the premium leather seats in the least luxury sedan. Savannah was sitting here, in a faded t-shirt, complaining about a $50 grocery bill, while she had quietly siphoned $32,000 of his blood and sweat to a con man. "I know, baby," Wyatt said. His voice was a rasp, rough with fake exhaustion. He reached across the table, letting his calloused fingers lightly brush against her knuckles. The contact made his stomach heave, but he held his hand steady. "I'll ask the foreman for more overtime this weekend. Maybe pick up a Sunday shift. We'll make it work." Savannah offered him a soft, sympathetic smile that made his blood run cold. "You shouldn't have to work yourself to death," she said, her voice dripping with counterfeit concern. "But it's just until we get the house fund back on track. We'll get there. I promise." The lie hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Wyatt looked into her eyes, searching for a flicker of guilt, a shadow of hesitation beneath the warm brown irises. There was nothing. Her gaze was clear, absolute, and terrifyingly empty. She had convinced herself of her own righteousness. In her mind, the money was hers to spend, and Wyatt was merely the machinery designed to generate it. His internal dilemma was a violent storm. The urge to flip the table, to grab her by the shoulders and scream the exact dollar amounts of the seaside and hotel receipts into her face, clawed at the inside of his ribs. He wanted to shatter the illusion, to watch the color drain from her cheeks when she realized he knew exactly who she was kissing in the alleyway. But if the mask slipped now, if he showed even a fraction of the rage boiling beneath his skin, his leverage would evaporate. She would panic, empty whatever pennies were left in their checking account, and run to Tyler's leased car. Instead, Wyatt nodded slowly. He picked up his fork and took another bite of the cheap food. "We'll get there," he echoed, his tone perfectly flat, devoid of any inflection that might betray the cold, calculating machinery turning in his mind. He watched her return to her meal, checking her phone under the table, entirely oblivious to the fact that the man sitting across from her was no longer her husband. He was the architect of her ruin, silently laying the foundation for a collapse she would never see coming. The daily performance was killing him, suffocating his soul inch by inch, but the finale would be worth every agonizing second. Wyatt sat in the back corner of the county library, the low hum of the overhead fluorescent lights a familiar comfort. He had paid $3 for an hour of public computer access and another $1 for a single sheet of heavy, high-quality linen paper from the print station. On the monitor, a meticulously crafted document stared back at him, the culmination of 2 days of silent, obsessive research. The letterhead bore the imposing, conservative logo of Bennett and Hayes, a prominent corporate law firm located downtown. The text beneath it was dense with fabricated legal jargon, referencing a confidential settlement agreement regarding a chemical coolant leak that had occurred at Carter Industries 18 months prior. The leak had been a real event, a minor valve failure that resulted in mild skin irritation for a few dock workers and a quiet reprimand from safety inspectors. In Wyatt's forged reality, however, the company's negligence had yielded a massive, quiet payout to avoid a class action lawsuit. He reviewed the second paragraph, his eyes lingering on the bolded figure near the center of the page. Subject to the finalization of the enclosed release forms, a lump sum disbursement of $150,000. 00 will be allocated to the injured party. $150,000. It was an astronomical sum for a forklift operator and a diner waitress. It was enough to buy a modest house in cash. More importantly, it was enough to trigger a devastating wave of greed in a woman who had already sold her marriage for a fraction of that amount. It was the perfect bait for a man whose lifestyle was built entirely on leased luxury. Wyatt clicked print. He watched the thick paper slide from the tray, the black ink crisp and authoritative. He folded the document precisely into thirds, his calloused fingers carefully pressing the creases, and slipped it into a windowed envelope he had salvaged from a junk mail credit card offer. When he returned to apartment 4B, the air inside felt fundamentally different. It was no longer a suffocating tomb of betrayal. It was a hunting blind. Savannah was working the closing shift at the Sunrise Cafe and wouldn't be home until after midnight. Wyatt walked into the cramped kitchen. He ripped the top of the envelope open, creating a jagged, hurried tear. He pulled the letter halfway out, ensuring the bolded $150,000 figure was partially exposed but still required a deliberate pull to read in full. He placed it on the stained Formica counter, right next to the coffee maker. It was the exact spot Savannah stood every morning, waiting for her caffeine to brew, habitually scrolling through her phone. She couldn't miss it. He stepped back, analyzing the placement. It looked natural. It looked like the careless action of an exhausted man who had opened a piece of mail been utterly overwhelmed by the news, and left it out in a daze before collapsing into bed. To ensure the trap was absolutely irresistible, he added a final detail. He left a black pin resting diagonally across the envelope, subtly suggesting that he was preparing to sign whatever forms were required to claim the windfall. Wyatt went to the bedroom, stripped down to his undershirt, and lay on the mattress. For the first time in a week, his heart wasn't racing with anxiety or burning with impotent rage. It beat with the slow, steady rhythm of a predator who had finally set the snare. He closed his eyes, imagining the exact moment the realization would hit her. She would read the number. Her breath would hitch. She would calculate the possibilities of a new life. And then, inevitably, she would reach for her phone to tell the man she was currently financing. The bait was in the water. All Wyatt had to do now was wait for the morning and listen for the splash. The break room at Carter Industries smelled of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. At 3:15 a.m., the massive warehouse was relatively quiet, save for the distant, rhythmic thumping of the loading docks. Wyatt sat alone at a scratched plastic table, staring blankly at the peeling linoleum floor. In his ears, a cheap pair of wired earbuds played the audio file he had just retrieved from the digital voice-activated recorder he had taped beneath the kitchen island. Static. Then, the distinct rattle of Savannah's keys in the apartment lock. It was 1:30 p.m. the previous afternoon. Footsteps echoing on the linoleum. The rustle of a plastic grocery bag being set down. Then, silence, followed by a sharp, sudden intake of breath. She had found the letter. Wyatt listened to the frantic tapping of a phone screen. A moment later, she spoke, her voice breathless. "Tyler, you need to come over. Now. Just get here." 20 agonizing minutes of dead air passed before the heavy thud of the front door opening again. Tyler's voice, smooth and slightly winded, filled Wyatt's ears. "What is it? Did he find out?" "No. Look at this," Savannah said. The microphone caught the crisp rustle of the heavy linen paper shifting. A long pause. Wyatt could perfectly picture Tyler's slick, manicured hands holding the forged Bennett and Hayes letterhead, his eyes scanning the fabricated legal jargon. 150,000, Tyler whispered. The sheer, naked reverence in his voice made Wyatt's stomach turn. "Are you serious? 150 grand for a chemical leak?" "He just left it on the counter," Savannah said, her words rushing together in a greedy blur. "He hasn't even signed the release forms yet. But when he does, the money goes into the account. Our account." "Listen to me carefully," Tyler said, his tone shifting into something sharp, commanding, and fundamentally selfish. Wyatt heard the clink of glass. Tyler was casually pouring himself a drink from Wyatt's cheap bourbon stash. "Do not file the divorce papers yet. If you leave him now, before the money clears, his lawyer could argue it's entirely his settlement. You have to wait until it drops." "I can't stand playing the devoted wife much longer, Ty," Savannah whined. "He comes home smelling like diesel and sweat every morning. He barely speaks. It makes my skin crawl." Wyatt closed his eyes. The words didn't hurt. The part of him that could be wounded by Savannah had bled out days ago. What replaced it was a cold, architectural calculation. He felt nothing but a distant, clinical disgust. "It's 75 grand, Savannah." Tyler pushed, his voice dropping to a low, persuasive purr. He had built the trap to see if they would bite, but they had swallowed the hook whole, begging to be reeled in. Tyler was an opportunistic parasite, and Savannah was a willing host, entirely blinded by the illusion of a luxury she had never actually earned. He checked the time on his phone. His shift was over in 3 hours. The financial diversion was complete, the evidence of her theft was secured, and now he had them on tape plotting to strip him of non-existent assets. Wyatt stood up, tossing his empty coffee cup into the trash bin. It was time to start digging into Tyler Black's background. If the vendor was so desperate for $75,000 that he was actively advising his mistress to stay in a miserable marriage, there had to be a reason. And Wyatt was going to find it. The pale blue light of Savannah's discarded tablet illuminated the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air of apartment 4B. Savannah was working the dinner rush at the Sunrise Cafe. a shift she had explicitly taken to help build back the savings. Wyatt sat on the edge of the unmade bed, a bitter smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth as he typed the digits of his new debit card into a premium background check portal. It cost $49 for the comprehensive report. It was the best investment he had made in 7 years. He watched the progress bar inch across the screen, a digital hourglass counting down to Tyler Black's true identity. When the 50-page PDF finally materialized, Wyatt began to read, methodically stripping away the vendor's tailored suits and least luxury. The first page shattered the illusion of success. Tyler did not live in the upscale downtown lofts he casually mentioned to Savannah. His registered address was a cramped, month-to-month studio apartment in a dilapidated building on the industrial side of the city. Wyatt scrolled to the financial history, and the picture grew even darker. Tyler's credit score was a smoking crater. There were 3 active civil judgments against him from aggressive collection agencies, totaling nearly $40,000. The sleek, black sedan parked in the alleyway every afternoon? The report showed it was heavily in arrears. A repossession order had been issued 2 weeks ago. Tyler was actively hiding the vehicle from the bank. But it was page 12 that made Wyatt stop breathing for a moment. It was a trail of dismissed lawsuits and a recently withdrawn Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing. The details painted a vivid, desperate picture of a man drowning in severe gambling debts. There were records of massive wire transfers to offshore sports betting syndicates, followed by periods of complete financial insolvency. Tyler wasn't a businessman building a future. He was an addict, bleeding out from 1,000 self-inflicted wounds. The reality of the situation washed over Wyatt, bringing with it a cold, terrifying clarity. Savannah wasn't Tyler's partner. She was his mark. Tyler had found a naive, dissatisfied waitress with access to a hard-working husband's savings account. Every dollar of Wyatt's overtime, every skipped lunch and aching muscle, had gone directly into the pockets of Tyler's bookies. And now, the vendor was hovering around the fabricated $150,000 settlement like a starving vulture. Tyler had no intention of buying a house down south with Savannah. He was stringing her along just long enough to get his hands on the payout. The moment the check cleared, Tyler would vanish to pay off his debts, leaving Savannah entirely abandoned. Wyatt leaned back, resting his head against the cheap drywall. He didn't feel angry anymore. He felt a profound, almost peaceful sense of irony. Savannah had traded a man who literally broke his back to build her a home for a con artist who was using her to survive. She had willingly drained her own secure future for a mirage. He closed the tablet, erasing the search history with practiced efficiency. The urge to confront her, to slap the 50-page report onto the kitchen table and watch her world crumble, was gone. That would be too easy. It would give her a chance to brace herself. Instead, Wyatt decided to let her keep dreaming. He would let her believe in the settlement, let her believe in the house down south, and let her believe in the man in the cheap suit. When the fall finally came, he wanted her to experience the exact same paralyzing drop he had felt when he first saw that empty bank account. The trap was fully set. It was time to pull the lever. The morning sun cut through the dusty blinds of apartment 4B, casting sharp, prison-like bars across the kitchen table. Wyatt sat across from Savannah, a thick manila envelope resting between them like an unexploded bomb. It was exactly 2 weeks since he had planted the fake letter from Bennett and Hayes. 2 weeks of Savannah playing the doting, supportive wife, her performances growing increasingly desperate and transparent as the phantom payday approached. Wyatt reached out and opened the metal clasp of the envelope. The sound was loud and metallic in the quiet room. He slid out a stack of dense, legal-sized documents. "The lawyer couriered these over this morning," Wyatt said, his voice a perfect, monotone drawl of exhaustion. He rubbed his temples, playing the part of a man battered by bureaucracy. "It's the final release forms for the Carter Industries settlement. Once these are filed, they wire the $150,000. Savannah's eyes locked onto the papers. A hungry, predatory gleam flashed in her brown irises, so intense it almost made Wyatt recoil. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, tracing the edge of the top page. It bore the fabricated Bennett and Hayes letterhead, a masterpiece of corporate deception. "So, this is it," she breathed, forcing a wavering smile. "We just sign, and it's over?" "Almost," Wyatt replied smoothly. She was signing away her right to his future, her claim to his sweat, and her safety net, all with a bright, counterfeit smile. When she finished, she pushed the stack back toward him. "Done. When do they send the money?" "It takes about 48 hours to process," Wyatt said, carefully sliding the documents back into the manila envelope. He sealed the clasp, securing his freedom. "By Friday, everything will be exactly where it belongs." Savannah exhaled a long, shaky breath, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "I'm so proud of you, Wyatt. We're finally going to get what we deserve." Wyatt looked down at her delicate fingers resting on his calloused skin. He didn't pull away. He simply nodded, a cold, absolute certainty settling over his soul. "Yes, Savannah," he said softly, looking directly into her lying eyes. "You are going to get exactly what you deserve." It was Friday at 6 in the evening. The golden hour cast a warm, deceptive glow through the dusty blinds of apartment 4B. Savannah sat on the edge of the cheap synthetic leather sofa, her phone clutched tightly in her hands. She was wearing a new dress, her hair carefully styled, practically vibrating with the anticipation of checking a bank account that was supposed to hold $150,000. The bedroom door opened. Wyatt stepped out, but he wasn't wearing his usual faded work clothes. He wore a clean flannel shirt and jeans, and slung over his shoulder was his heavy canvas duffel bag. Savannah looked up, a confused smile faltering on her lips. "Wyatt, where are you going? Did the wire transfer clear?" Wyatt stopped in the center of the living room. He let the duffel bag slide from his shoulder, hitting the linoleum with a heavy, final thud. He didn't walk toward the kitchen to check his laptop. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a single piece of paper. It wasn't the fabricated legal letter. It was a crumpled, heavily creased bank statement, the very first one he had printed 3 weeks ago. He walked over and dropped it onto the coffee table, right next to her phone. Savannah frowned, leaning forward to pick it up. "What is this?" "That," Wyatt said, his voice terrifyingly calm, devoid of any anger or sorrow, "is the autopsy report of our marriage. $32,000, Savannah, bled out over 6 months. The color drained from her face so rapidly it looked as if she had been physically struck. The paper trembled in her hand. Her mouth opened and closed, struggling to form a coherent lie. "Wyatt, I can explain. It was an emergency, an investment in Tyler Black." Wyatt interrupted, the name falling from his lips like cold iron. "Or in his least luxury sedan. The one that got repossessed on Tuesday by the bank." Savannah froze. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an exit, a plausible denial, a lifeline. She found none in the cold, dead stare of the man she had underestimated and exploited for 7 years. Wyatt reached into the side pocket of his bag and pulled out the thick stack of stapled papers, the 50-page background check. He tossed it onto her lap. "There is no settlement, Savannah. There was never a chemical leak payout. The documents you eagerly signed on Wednesday weren't release forms to make us rich. They were a legally binding post-nuptial separation of assets. You waived your right to alimony. You surrendered any claim to my future earnings, and you legally accepted that $32,000 as your complete, early share of the marital estate. You are legally severed from me, and you are broke." "No," she whispered, her voice cracking, the reality of her signature sinking in. "No, you couldn't have. The lawyer was real. The letterhead was printed at the county library for $1, Wyatt said smoothly. Panic, raw and ugly, twisted Savannah's features. She dropped the papers and lunged for her phone, her thumbs frantically swiping across the screen. "Tyler," she gasped, her breathing erratic. "Tyler will fix this. We're leaving anyway. We don't need your money." Wyatt stood in absolute silence, watching the final act of the tragedy unfold. He watched her press the phone to her ear. He watched her wait, her knuckles turning white. "We're sorry, the number you have reached is not in service." The automated voice leaked from the earpiece, loud enough in the dead quiet of the apartment to sound like a judge's gavel. Tyler Black, drowning in severe gambling debts and facing bankruptcy, had realized days ago that the joint account was closed. The vendor had taken the last of Savannah's stolen money and vanished the moment the well dried up. Savannah pulled the phone away, staring at the blank screen as if it had betrayed her. She dialed again. Her hands shook violently. The same automated voice echoed back. The realization hit her with the crushing force of a physical blow. Her shoulders collapsed, and the phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the floor. "He used me," she whispered to the empty room, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. "And you used me," Wyatt replied, his tone an endless, unfeeling winter. "The only difference is I survived it." Wyatt didn't wait for Savannah to stop crying. He simply reached down, picked up his heavy canvas duffel bag by the straps, and hoisted it onto his shoulder. The weight of his grandfather's silver watch and his mechanic's tools settled comfortably against his back. He didn't look at her as he walked out the door of apartment 4B for the final time. The click of the deadbolt sliding into place behind him was the loudest, most definitive sound he had ever heard. The drive across the city was quiet. The neon lights of the diner and the flashing signs of the industrial park faded in his rearview mirror. He parked his battered Ford outside a small, unassuming brick building on the edge of town. It wasn't the house with the backyard he had bled for, but it was his. He climbed the 2 flights of stairs and unlocked the door to his new apartment. The space was entirely bare. No synthetic leather sofa, no lingering scent of vanilla perfume, and no ghosts of a fabricated marriage. It was just an empty room, quiet and clean. Wyatt walked over to the single large window overlooking the street. He reached out and pushed the glass up, letting the crisp, unburdened morning air rush into the room. The early sun cut through the chill, warming his calloused hands as they rested on the sill. He had lost his savings, and he had lost the 7 years he spent building a life with a stranger. But as he stood in the sunlight, feeling the profound, silent peace of a man who no longer had to pretend, he knew he had won the only thing that mattered. He thought of Savannah, sitting alone in an apartment she could no longer afford, abandoned by the man she had stolen for, clutching a legally binding document of her own ruin. Wyatt took a deep breath of the fresh air, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips. The price of your freedom was exactly what you paid for it. Nothing.